Welcome to Syntax. Today, we're going to be talking about React Server Components. It is April of 2025. I just had to look at my clock to know that. It is April of 2025, and you might not know where we're at with these things. You know, some people might still view React Server Components as this NextJS feature. So what is the status of them? How could you use them? Even what are they to a degree? And just generally, what's up with React Server Components? What's the deal?
Yeah.
What's the deal with React Server Components?
What's the deal? Like they've been around since like for 5 years, but also they still haven't, I don't feel like they have fully caught on yet. Yeah. So we're going to try to attempt to explain why and what they are and sort of where you can use them right now. And it's not just Next.js.
And what's the deal with bad websites? Your website shouldn't be bad. You should be able to have a tool like Sentry. If your website's bad, it's probably because you're not using Sentry. Sentry at Sentry.io, the perfect place to make sure your application is running as good as it possibly can. It's fast, it's friendly, it's not crashing for users, there's no errors, and it's even functioning at all, period. So if you want to make sure your application is working, and not only just make sure, but let's get this straight. It's about fixing it fast. You have things like session replay to see exactly a video of what happened, what went wrong when the thing crashed. You have all kinds of tools to make solving the bugs really, really fast. There's even some AI assistant tools in there as well. It's the best. It's just seriously the best. So this podcast is presented by Sentry. Head on over to sentry.io/syntax. Sign up and use the coupon code TASTYTREAT, all lowercase, all one word, and get 2 months for free. Let's give a quick rundown of what React Server Components actually are. Because I do feel like even today when people talk about them, there is some misunderstanding, maybe a little bit about what exactly they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people think, well, my client component's already server rendered, so like, isn't that good enough? So server components in React are components that are rendered either as part of a build step, which is like ahead of time. Like server components don't require a server, which is kind of funny. But in most cases, you're probably going to be rendered on demand entirely on the server. That differs from client components, which client components are often rendered obviously in the client, but they can also still be server rendered. The difference between the two is that server components simply just send their output to the browser, similar to how server rendering HTML works, versus client components, they bring everything they need in order to render themselves on the client, which it's not really one or the other. In most cases, you'll be using both of them together. Yeah. Server components are async, meaning that you can simply just await before you return data, which is amazing API for many use cases. So you don't have to do like a weird loading state, and if it's loading, then return nothing. You can simply just await like a database call, and then once that await is resolved, you can go ahead and render out your markup, your JSX.
Yes. Server components, they can also be suspended. So basically, you can continue rendering the rest of your app while these things are working on their render. So it's not like it's going to hold up if you are awaiting them.
Yeah. Modern React is often streamed, meaning that the browser will start to render pieces of the website. And then if you have something that might take a little while, for example, on my new website, it's probably by the time you're listening to this, westboss.com, there's a Twitter in the footer, right? And I don't want to hold up the entire page while I'm fetching Twitter. What if that takes a while? So you can suspend that, and then the rest of the website will get sent. And then when that one component is done, it's no longer suspended, and then it will send the markup from the server to the client and render it on out.
You got a Twitter in the footer, my guy?
Yeah, I had to do some somewhat seedy, sketchy stuff in order to get the Twitter API working, but I've I've got it entirely reverse engineered. I'm pretty, and it's been working solid for a couple of months now.
Nice. Yeah, server components, basically the way that it sends an RSC, a React Server Component payload to browser, it's basically sending text, right? Which is then, it's rehydrated, right? Is that the word you would use in this?
No, because rehydrated assumes that things are bound to it.
Okay. Yeah.
Rehydrated means that the browser is then setting it up. So server components are simply just sending either their HTML to the browser, or if you are doing something like refreshing one of the components, it is simply just sending the outputted React payload. You can think of it as the server sending HTML. It's not technically HTML. It's technically React code that is used to embed it, but it's not fair to say that it's rehydrated because there's no client-side stuff happening on a server function unless you're explicitly using a client component.
Gotcha. That tracks. Okay. Forgive me if I'm a little off on some of these things. The Svelte way of doing things doesn't have any of this stuff. So I am like, my understanding of this stuff is definitely from a React developer who hasn't used React Server Components beyond the very basics. And so because of that, like, you could think of this conceptually, like you said, it's not HTML that's being sent from the server, but you could think of it conceptually as if you were, like when we're doing HTMX stuff, right? Yeah. People say you have something and it just returns HTML instead of data and swaps out that HTML.
Exactly.
Conceptually, it's similar to that, except for it is React code and not HTML straight up.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not bringing anything else with it, So if you had like an expensive library to do like markdown parsing or code highlighting is a good example where in order to do code highlighting in the browser, you either have to use a smaller library that's not as good, or you can use a very large library. You have to download the entire thing on in the browser, which is not awful in some cases, but in the case of a server component for my code blocks, I render it 100% on the server, and it simply just sends the HTML to the browser, and I don't have to worry about how large any of my plugins are for markdown parsing or for code highlighting or anything like that, because it all happens on the server, and just a thin little markup is sent to the client.
Yeah, it sends the result.
Exactly.
Not the library. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. Server functions, which were previously called server actions, are functions that run on the server and sort of work with React Server Components. So this could be like a database call, could be, like I said, markdown, code highlighting. Server functions are functions that can be called either from the client or on a form submission, meaning that you essentially get RPC, meaning that you can write a function that runs on the server, and then you can simply just call that from your UI, and instead of it importing that server function into your client-side application, it will just run the RPC back and forth commands between the two and send the data from one to another. And then there are several hooks you can use for maintaining. useActionState is the big one for maintaining the return, what comes back from the response, any pending, like if something is waiting, clearing caches, all that stuff.
Word. Cool.
That's like a very quick rundown of what React Server Components are. So where are we at now with all of the different frameworks?
Yeah. So I guess the joke of it being just a Next.js feature doesn't really track these days, but you will see that there is not a ton of support still out there with like two major platforms supporting it well, and then other things, potentially. So Next.js, full support. It's the first one to really embrace React Server Components. The Waku, which is honestly really exciting framework, Waku.gg. It's the minimal React framework. Does have full support for React server components. And the documentation I found on these to be very good in terms of how to use them with Waku.
Yeah.
So Waku is enticing to me, honestly.
So I moved my entire website, which was on Gatsby. I moved it to Next.js, and I found myself frustrated, not with React server components, but just with like having to do things in a very specific Next.js way, which normally I don't mind because I'm building stuff from scratch, but having to try to shoehorn my like Gatsby code into Next.js specific way, it was a bit too frustrating for me, and the builds kept breaking, stuff like that. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to try Waku. So Waku is from the developer behind ZooStand and what's the other one?
Jotai,
yeah. And I'm really happy with it. So almost all of the code from the Next.js ported over to Waku because it was just React server components, right? It just worked a little bit nicer. It uses Vite, which I'm pretty happy about. It's like 3 or 4 Vite processes sort of put together because there's a client-side Vite process. There is a server rendered client Vite process. There's a React server component Vite process, and I think there's one more, which is a little odd, but it works, and I've been really happy with it. It still is early, like it's not out of 1.0 yet. The documentation is. You said the documentation is great. It looks nice, but the documentation is sparse. You have to do most of your learning from examples. Yes. Clear,
maybe not complete.
There's no like I would go as far to say there's like no docs. It's just like a bunch, like one page showing all the APIs, and then there's like 30 or 40 examples, which I really like because you can dip into the examples directory and go in. But like, I'm a bit of an idiot and I figured it out, and I've been really happy with it. I got it hosted on Cloudflare Workers. The whole thing is building in like 2 minutes. Like that's the build process from Next to Waku went like in half, which was unbelievable. So I was really happy with that.
Yeah, I want to take a brief sidebar here. They had a little thing in the bottom corner of the Waku website saying designed by Candy Code, candycode.com. Man, what a cool little site this was. They've designed a lot of things that we like the payload CMS, Joe Tai's website, but just a lot of cool little websites if you go through their kind of general thing. But also the website itself is just really pleasant and modern in a great way, while not looking like anything you've really seen before. So, big fan of this website.
Gradient scroll bar. Is that possible?
Is that even possible? How
are they doing that? I didn't know you could put a gradient scroll bar, or have they re-implemented it?
They possibly re-implemented the scroll bar. I don't know. I haven't examined that. There's a lot of interesting gradient stuff here on this website, whether that's gradient text or
scroll bar thumb, background image, linear gradient. Yeah, you can put a background image on a scroll bar thumb. I didn't know you could do that.
It looks good. Yep.
I've never seen that before. Well, today I learned. What does it look like in Safari? Hold on.
So
the scroll bar APIs
we don't go there.
Were different in every. Oh, it works in Safari. Let's try it on Firefox.
Firefox is
but everybody's
most
standardized.
Likely for it to not work.
No, there was a standardization of the scroll bar CSS API, but from what I remember, it was relatively limited.
Okay, no gradient on my Firefox.
No gradient on Firefox. It's still using the older like : WebKit scroll bar.
WebKit, yeah.
Big fan. That looks cool.
Yeah, cool site. Candy Code, nice work.
React Router, not shipped yet. React Router's been talking about React Server components for probably a couple of years now. It was supposed to be shipped with the remix to React Router 7, and then it never got its way in. There's been a pull request open for a long time. It's a very hard thing to get right, and I think that it's very hard for these library authors to try to figure out how to bring it in. Alongside that, Michael Jackson, who's one of the creators of React Router, he put out a tweet that says, React server components are nice in theory, but 5 years in, it's not working out. It's been fun. React, you taught me a lot, but I'm done. And he says, have fun with your React server, DOM, ESM, Vite client server bundles. And I think that's what it is that building a framework that supports React server components goes so deep into the bundler realm. Like I said, Waku's 3 or 4 Vite processes. It's just problems all the way down. I can't imagine all the headaches. The headaches myself using it have been high. I can't imagine trying to build the framework that it does. Even something as simple as a singleton in NextJS is just like not possible because there's several bundles and you cannot share a singleton between the two. Like it's not possible at all. It's really frustrating.
Even to be clear, people are asking, are you done with React or just React server components? And he says the whole thing. On to greener pastures. So it seems like he's done with React. This has been like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah. I'm curious. Maybe we should have him on to talk about this because I've been following his GitHub for about a year now, and he's been cranking out all kinds of standards-based modules. Things that are based on ESM, things that are based on web standards, things that are based on browser built-ins, and just like something that I've been beating this drum as well. I did a couple conference talks about this. Is just like standards-based JavaScript is the future. And a lot of this React server component stuff is not that. It's very heavy on bundlers. And I like React server components, but it's not the standards that we know and love. So I'd be curious to see. He's cooking on something. No, you can tell because like they said that something will come of Remix, and like they haven't announced what that is. He's been cranking out all these tiny little modules, which he's doing that for a reason. He's definitely cooking on. He's cooking. I'm curious.
Wasn't
to see
there
what
some
he's cooking.
new HTML or a new JavaScript API for like swapping DOM elements or something just somewhat recently?
Yeah,
what was that called? I'm like trying to Google it and I cannot find the name of it.
Yeah, it's Move Before. And this is a new JavaScript API which will allow you to move parts of your DOM somewhere else without normally what happens is if you move a DOM element, you take it out of the DOM, you lose all of your state, you lose all of your bindings, all of your event listeners, everything, and then you put it back in and it has to re-render it, and it's got to re-add your bindings and all of that. And this new Move Before API will allow you to simply just move things in the DOM without having to detach any of that. So why are you asking about that? What are you thinking?
Oh, just that the ways that we work in front-end frameworks, they seem to be being aided a little bit more by newer JavaScript APIs and even newer CSS APIs, like whether that is, view transitions, easier ways to swap our elements that are less needing of a shadow DOM type of situation. I don't really know. It just feels like the web platform itself is getting more friendly towards the types of things that we've been really leaning on, things like the virtual DOM for.
And React itself is working on something called React Activity. It used to be called, I think, React Off Screen. I haven't looked into it too much, but I think it's going to use that API. And I think the idea with that is you can pre-render things off screen. And then when it comes time to having to show them, you can swap them in lightning fast without having to do any of the reattaching that we talked about.
Interesting stuff.
Yes. Vite. Can you use React Server components with Vite? Kind of. That's Waku has figured it out, or Waku. But Vite 6 has this new API called the Environment API. And the whole idea with the Environment API is that you can run Vite in multiple environments. Vite was simply a browser-based bundling tool. And now with the environment API, it can work in Node, it can work on Cloudflare workers, it can run on the browser. And that then opens up a lot more for framework authors, because now you can control the whole stack of like both my server and my client all are running through Vite, instead of having to do some weird like bundling. The running that on Node has always been tricky. So Waku doesn't use this just yet. I'm assuming they will move over to that, and then that will get rid of the 3 or 4 Vite processes. There's a couple of plugins. A couple of people have taken stabs at plugins for Vite using React Server Components, but nothing that is like simply, how easy Vite is to get up and running. I bet we will start to see that soon, where there will be like a quick little starter that gives you a server and a client all running through Vite.
Yeah, let's hope so. Tanstack, a lot of people use Tanstack Query. You can use React Server Components via NextJS with Tanstack Query currently. There is something called Tanstack Start, which is their whole platform. Tanstack Start itself does not support React Server Components just yet. It does do SSR. I know we talked to Tanner, and there's an emphasis on like client-side stuff within Tanstack Start, but you can do SSR with it. Start does have React Server Components planned, but like you said, it's also like React Router been delayed many times. I personally don't know the status of where it's at right now.
I jumped into the Discord a couple of weeks ago when I was like rethinking Next.js, and I was like, what should I was like, maybe Start, and I was like, hey, like, where are you at with this type of thing? And it seems like they're more focusing on getting like a solid start, not solid start, but like getting everything with Tanstack Start just to kind of like figure it out and finish and out the door, because then adding server components to that is just another thing. So I think they want to get everything else stabilized first, and then they will move on to it. But they are planning on it, and Tanner's a big fan of server components, he said. So eventually, but it is kind of interesting that like, we're a couple years in, and really only Waku and Next.js are like the two
usable,
like solid ways. And and even Waku is, I maybe would say don't build a huge application, personal website, which is relatively large, but I don't mind fussing with it. But it's moving quick, and things are breaking, right? It's pre 1.0.
Yeah, word.
Bun, nothing really there on Bun just yet, but Bun is big on like running JSX on the server. And they have quite a few demos of kind of similar ideas. So I wonder if we'll see something like that, or we'll see something similar to React Server Components come out of Bun. And DIY, you can try to do it yourself. I got it running with like Express at one point. Highly not recommended. It's bundler problems all the way down. So
good luck with that.
Yeah. It's a little bit of exhaustion on some people's, I think, with all of the different bundling and everything. And a lot of people want to get back to just standards. I'm somewhere in between where I just want everything to work together. But then when it is too tight, sometimes you hit these issues, and that's maybe my next thing is like, why the hate? Why do some people not like React Server Components? Bundling complexity, probably a big one. Limitations. There's no like explicit methods, get, post, put, middleware, all these things. Like these things are very simple with like a Tanstack Start, where they're just not possible. And if you build things in the React Server Component way, you're probably fine. But a lot of people have existing code. A lot of people want to do things in the way that they understand them. And if you just don't have those knobs to turn or in the React Server Component world.
Yeah. I mean, and in that case, it's still pretty much just Next.js is doing it the way.
Yeah. And like Next.js has like a whole bunch of like weird limitations around redirects and cookies and what you're allowed to do here and there. And a lot of those, as I moved from Next to Waku, I realized that a lot of those limitations are not Next's fault. They are simply just because of limitations in streaming.
Oh, streaming.
And
okay.
you simply cannot do things like set a cookie when you have already started streaming.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that hate gets put on Next.js, also just because a lot of people weirdly hate React and Next in general. But there's that, and then there's also just like Next.js is very opinionated about the way that they do things, right? And that's fine. You can use whatever it is that you want. A lot of people much prefer that because there's not as many foot guns of doing potentially expensive things.
Yeah. I think another reason that people hate this is because there's just like a lack of parity amongst React frameworks, as we've talked about here. You aren't getting the same React in all of the frameworks. And so React Server Components, a React core feature, is only available in Next.js and Waku and, these kind of fragmented ways. So because of that, it is like fracturing the React landscape completely. There's no parity. You're not using React as a platform. You're using parts of React at any given point. And I think for me, the features that exist within RSC are all things that I would have said, yes, give me that. And now I'm like, oh, but not like this. Not like this. I wanted these features, but I don't
my
know about,
way.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The hilarious thing about that is that React Server Components, if the whole point of it is that there's not going to be a way to do it in every single framework. And like I was able to move over 98% of my Next.js code to Waku because it is a standard. But the frustration, like you said, is that a lot of these routers and frameworks have not yet implemented them. So in an ideal world, we would all get along and we would all have a single way to do things. Like data fetching is now and like loading, those are now in React core. How do you fetch data? How do you inject data into a component? How do you do caching? A lot of this stuff is built into React core, but it's not yet been implemented in all of the frameworks. So there's a lot of that frustration out there. You should be able to just npm install some random component, and that component will bring your client side, your server side, your data fetching. It should bring them all, and you don't have to worry about integrating into it. But we're not there just quite yet.
Yeah.
It's been several years. I don't know that we will ever get there. I hope
it's been too long is really what the answer is. It's been too long. Yeah. Bummer.
Yes. Last thing I want to say is React Server Components lock-in, because I see this a lot on the Next.js and React Reddit.
Yeah.
I don't think so, because most of my logic code moved from Gatsby and moved to Next.js and moved to Waku because I try to keep everything as standard on server. And even things like the form actions API in React is built on, thankfully, a standard. And that's the form data API. So there is a little bit of like weird code that needs to be written in some cases if you're moving some JavaScript from one to another, but it's no different than if you're moving Express code to something standard as well. So I don't feel like it's a huge lock-in. I feel like I could get out of this React Server Components in relatively quickly. I don't think I could get out of JSX very quickly. And people are going to be asking, like, why didn't you choose X, Y, and Z? Why don't you use Svelte? I had no interest in rewriting all of my JSX into some other random templating language. I just wanted to move it over one-to-one, pass the data in that it needed, and those components stayed untouched.
Word. Yeah, well, I think that's a good update for people who are wondering what the status of this stuff is. It's really easy, like, to get into a time machine here, and now it's X amount of days from, when they were first announced, and just wonder, hey, what is going on with that? I'm not using it, or I'm not using Next. What's the deal with that? So here's the status. That's where we're at today, and I gotta say, hopefully this list changes a little bit in 6 months, or else I think, I don't know, like, you could call React Server Components a failure at some point.
I think if it's not picked up by React Router and Tanstack, or if it doesn't have any more momentum in 6 months, a year from now, I think people will either, I don't know, maybe move to something else, or we're already starting to see that as well. Because like, it's not like React can like, oh, never mind, like they kind of bet the farm on this type of thing. So I still feel good about it, but that's just me out of one community, and I certainly would have not have expected it would take this long to implement, and we're still here 5 years in.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree and say I don't feel good about it, not because I don't believe in the API, but I just think 5 years and to have this be the result is not good. That's why I would say that. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody, so much for tuning in. We will catch you on Wednesday.
Peace.